Very good. There we go. Didn't want to advance for a minute. I am Maryfaith Decker. My heritage is that of the Anglo-Saxons of present-day Great Britain, the Norwegian fishermen of southern Norway, and the Sami people of northern Norway, Sweden, and Finland. I reside and work in the ancestral and current homelands of the Haudenosaunee people, specifically the Onondaga, who continue to keep the fires of their culture alive on and around the Onondaga Nation to the north. I'm grateful for the genius of the Haudenosaunee systems of knowledge and that they continue to share that knowledge today. So type in the chat who you are and where you are. It'll be interesting to see where we're all from today. For your slides, do you have a little prompt that says the meeting is being recorded in the middle? I do too. I'm not sure how to remove that. Do you see it, Liza?
I don't, because I clicked it. I think if you just click it, but maybe I'm wrong.
Is there a close button?
It doesn't indicate that.
I think there's usually a continue. I just clicked on continue and it went away.
Thank you. That's how you do it. Very good. So in my work, creating and defending spaces of joyful learning in nature, I started the Lime Hollow Forest Preschool. That serves 27 full-day preschoolers, ages 3 to 5. We just had an inspection last week and we had raised our occupancy from 18 to 27, which makes me really happy. That's a full-day preschool program with early care and aftercare 5 days a week. And we were one of the first in New York State to be licensed as a fully outdoor program, though we do have an indoor classroom that we use sometimes. 5 years later, together with parents from the Forest Preschool, we began the Forest Learning Collective. So we have 4 learning groups whose learners are between the ages of 6 and 15. And at the time of the formation of the Forest Learning Collective, we integrated the Reggio Emilia approach into both the Forest Preschool and the Forest School. I am deeply committed to place-based, child-led, dialogic learning. A few years into running the Forest Preschool, it became apparent that although we as teachers could see the deep and impactful learning that was happening every day, it was not being communicated to our parents. Our parent communication consisted of little exchanges at pickup and drop off, which was wholly inadequate and doing a disservice to our program, the learners, and to child-led learning as a movement. So we needed a way to share children's learning with parents and educate them about the legitimacy of nature-based education. The Reggio Emilia approach has surfaced and resurfaced during the decades that I have explored alternative education. And every time the principles have rung true in my ears. The principles reflect my image of a child as capable, curious, self-directed learner. I'd like to take a look at these principles and how they apply to the Forest School setting. Children are capable of constructing their own learning. We trust children to decide what is the most important for them to be learning at the moment. We believe subverting that natural drive to learn is damaging to children's love of learning and their systems of natural curiosity. We believe that when children take the lead in their own education, the learning that happens is developmentally appropriate and deeply meaningful. Children are collaborators and they learn through interaction with their own communities. This is how all humans learn. Why would it be different for children? Children have 100 languages and should be encouraged to use all of them. I know we believe that children have the ability to express themselves in more than one way. They can write, they can draw. Now times that by 100, Loris Malaguchi, founder of the Reggio approach, describes the infinite ways that children can express, explore, connect their thoughts and feelings and imaginings. So type in the chat some of the languages that children have. We could start with drumming. My kids love to drum. And I feel like they're expressing how they feel through the way that they drum. Painting, forest painting is awesome. This painting started out with mud, and then we added the colors of the forest leaves, which were in the height of fall. So oranges and yellows and greens and browns and reds. Dancing, children love to dance. Photography, they love to take my camera. They love to take my phone, take pictures. We can probably come up with 100. The classroom environment is the third teacher. I think this is so much easier in nature. Nature is ever changing. We do adjust the environment to include educational areas we decide need to be better supported. I don't want to minimize that thoughtfulness, but all the elements that children need are already there in nature, and they're arranged aesthetically already. The classroom environment is the third teacher. We have to be open to what nature presents. We just never know. Sometimes it's a tragedy in nature, but it's also a unique learning opportunity. And sometimes we do manipulate the environment by adding provocations in order to meet the children's learning and provoke it to move forward. This was as simple as numbering rocks from 1 to 100 and pouring them out on the table. I just walked away and they started working with them. It was so interesting. It was fun to document that, see what they would do. Parents are partners in education. We recognize that parents are the first teachers in a child's life, and we wish to form a relationship of partnership. Teachers are partners, nurturers, and guides who help facilitate the exploration of children's interests as they work on short and long-term projects. So in Reggio Emilia philosophy, teachers are partners in the learning process. They're expected to be the ones who guide experiences, open-ended discoveries, and problem solving. The main goal for the teacher is to listen and observe the children, as well as question and listen for opportunities to encourage further exploration of a child's interests. Children and teachers are expected to collaborate, but it's the responsibility of the teacher to identify when a concept can be used to further discovery and learning. So as a mentor, it also means that teachers are not planning projects or learning points in advance, but they're allowing projects to emerge based on the interests of the children. This was a cool project. A couple of children just started pounding rocks into powder. There's some soft sandstone and some old bricks. And they wanted to do that day after day, anytime they had like just time. And then their teacher noticed this and added water to it. And we ended up with some beautiful pigments. And then we found the charcoal, of course, and added that. And so we've been extending that project. So documentation is a critical component of communication. The Reggio Emilia approach shifts the role of teacher to documenter in a way that we were already comfortable with our work doing observation documentation. Through my coursework at Antioch, I was able to dive deeply into pedagogical documentation and then immediately put the principles into practice in my nature-based programs. And what I've come to understand is that the integration of Reggio Emilia approach strengthens child-led, nature-based education and creates the community of relationships that we were looking for. I went to a lot of webinars and workshops that talked about Reggio and talked about Reggio style documentation before I really knew what it was. And so it was a hanging question for a long, long time for me. So here's a bit of documentation that I'd like to dive into a little bit more. It's so critical to the Reggio Emilia approach and to forest schooling. So documentation happens when teachers observe the learning as it is happening. They collect photographs and videos of the project in action. They write the background context of the story of the exploration. They include the children's words through recordings and transcriptions. This slide is an excerpt from a documentation from a project that developed around light. Kindergartners were having a warm lunch inside on a cold day. Friends noticed that when Sam held up his green sandwich container, his face turned green. When it's sunny out, our classroom gets lots of bright light. So here in the documentation, we are telling the background story of this learning. We pulled out some colored cellophane from the art supplies and explored our new view of the world in tinted colors. Before long, children realized that they could change the look of their faces, their hair, their clothing by holding the cellophane up to the light. Maryfaith, hey, you're pink. Why is that happening? Vera, because your reflection is coming on you. Children decided it would be wonderful to have these colors shining on them in the classroom and asked for tape to hang in the windows. They used scissors to change the shapes of the cellophane. Some children made color designs in the window, and some decided to use white paper behind the cellophane. Maryfaith, the sun made your shirt green? Hudson, no, the sun is making the colors turn people's shirts other colors. Kale, I'm just going to put this whole piece on. Asen, what? Who put the purple one up there? I didn't put that up there. And that was a running joke. Like when they would put a yellow piece of cellophane on the window and a red piece of cellophane on the window and it made orange, they would go, hey, who put that orange up there? You know, it was just a running joke. A few days later, I brought the photographs from this day back to show the children and restarted the conversation about light. They were so excited to see the printed photographs and noticed for the first time their own reflections in the cellophane. Sevi, Maryfaith is in there. Maryfaith, how did I get in there? Here's somebody's mouth and eye. What's going on in there? Sam, Junie's eye. Maryfaith, here's Oscar. What do you think the world looks like to Oscar? Sevi, green. Sevi, no, it's somebody's eyeball looking through. Somebody's nose. It's a whole face. Maryfaith, why am I on June's forehead? Sevi, I put a color on my eye. Maryfaith, oh, did it change back? Sevi, yes, when I took it off. So documentation is shared with the children who can make edits and additions. It's used as a tool for remembering. It's useful because young children live so fully in the moment and are learning and growing so quickly that they sometimes are surprised when reminded of their thinking from only a few days past. This kind of reminder use of documentation is also useful for the child who is absent to catch up and join in the in-progress work. So we brought out a giant piece of paper and I wrote the question, what is light? I wrote the children's thoughts around light while they drew pictures and wrote words. A few days later, I brought in an aquarium and filled it with water and I placed it in the window. When the sunlight shined through the water, it refracted a big rainbow that jiggled when the water stirred. We played with the rainbow and took videos of the way it jiggled around. Using a mirror, we were able to put the rainbow on the ceiling. Children hung the mirror from the ceiling by a string, and the spinning mirror made a bright spot that chased all around the classroom. Sid, rainbows, you did it. Maryfaith, I did not. I can't just make colors whenever I want to. Asen, it's that thing in your hand. Savannah, I hold. Maryfaith, what do you think this is made of? Asen, glass. Clayton, the sun made the light and the glass made the colors. Miles, I know the sun is going in there and the colors come out on the wall. Miles, look, it's on again. Whoa, that's cool. Maryfaith, the sun has to be really strong. So this was from a day when I brought in some prisms and the sun was going in and out from the clouds. So documentation is shared with parents who can extend the learning at home and share that learning back to the class. It's shared between teachers who can offer ideas and support to each other on interpreting the children's thinking and extending that learning by offering provocations, altering the educational landscape, and revisiting unanswered questions. So those meetings are every Tuesday for 3 hours. We budget it right into our program that the teachers bring the documentation to the meeting and share what's going on in their learning groups with that documentation. For years, we found that we did not have time during the day to do that. And so we built it right into our budget that we would do that. So that documentation is shared with the community at large in order to inspire, and so the children can feel the pride of their work reflected back. Revisiting has another dimension where the child can think again about their thinking. I love this quote. Documentation provides a way for children to revisit their experiences, extend their thinking. Teachers revisit documentation to better understand children's thinking and to inform their teacher practice. They revisit the children's work to see what just occurred, to listen again, and to gain further understanding. Revisiting is not merely asking children to remember what happened in a learning situation or event. Rather, the intent of revisiting is to recall past experiences as a platform for further exploration of new ideas with the children. So many times I think I heard them, but I didn't. And when I do their transcriptions, I realize that what that child was trying to say is a little different than what I thought they were trying to say. And so doing their transcriptions takes time, but it really helps you hear them. So let's take a look at another documentation of a learning story called Where Does Water Come From and Where Does It Go? So we had been making maps about some of our most familiar places, and we were at this puzzle of trying to figure out the shape of the shoreline of Gracie Pond, a place where we go almost every day. But you can't really see the whole shoreline from one vantage point. We were remembering all the places where the mud is deep or where the geese nested last year. So here's the story from the original documentation. Playing on thin ice at the edge of Gracie Pond, we notice that there's no ice where the water is flowing fast over the beaver dam. We can see the direction the water is moving. Suddenly, we see a mink run across the far side of the pond and disappear among the rocks of the dam. We decide to follow. The mink tracks led us to the dam that the water flows over on its way into the culvert under the driveway that leads to our school. The mink is long gone, but now the dam holds our attention. Water is pouring out of Gracie Pond. Where is it all going? On the next day of kindergarten, the children are begging to follow the stream that flows from the dam and the culvert under the road. The stream flows onto a neighboring property, not part of our nature center, but Natalie takes them for a long hike, and they follow the water as it winds through the neighbor's property and back into Lime Hollow. The children make maps of what they see on their hike. After following the water out of Gracie Pond and way out into Lime Hollow, the question arises, if so much water is going out, how is the water getting in? We decide to follow the shoreline to find out. We find a big creek flowing in and follow it to find that it connects with Trail for All Bridge, a favorite play spot. We draw maps again of Gracie Pond, of the inlet and the outlet, and our maps show now that the pond is no longer a simple circle. As we follow the creek at Trail for All, we find that it is made up of 3 creeks that come together. Where do they come from? We spend a day following one and find that it leads to the visitor center. But what about the other 2? Maryfaith, do you remember the day when we walked down the creek and we found the creek that fills up Gracie Pond? Hazel, but we need the 3 ways coming out. Me, so where would they be on the map, Hazel? Hazel, one going this way, one going this way, and one this way. Me, right, we found where all 3 come together. Sylvia, my boots were soaked. Maryfaith, once we figure out the other river, then we'll know where all the water, Hazel, no, creek. And there's 2 creeks that we didn't find out. One that goes to the side that we see that we see by the trail and one that's 3 in a row, Maryfaith, then we'll have to do a lot of sloshing around. So we'll have to walk up that way too. And then we can map all that water. Then we'll know where it comes from before it gets to Gracie Pond. Joseph, yeah. Hazel, but wouldn't Gracie empty though? Maryfaith, where does the water go after Gracie Pond? Hazel, ooh, maybe those other creeks. Maybe it goes in a loop. Maryfaith, oh, like in a circle? Joseph, it could circle around and into the creek that connects to Gracie Pond. Maryfaith, is that what you're asking? Where does it connect or where does it go out? Hazel, I know where it goes out, but why doesn't it go all the way out? Maryfaith, oh, like why doesn't all the water go completely out? Hazel, yes. So this is one of my favorite little bits of documentation that I think about a lot because I didn't realize right away what Hazel was asking. And it took a transcription for me to figure that out completely. She had a construct in her mind that the water, perhaps in our nature center, goes out of the pond, around in a circle, and back into the pond. And as an adult, it would never occur to me that the child was thinking that way without very careful documentation and listening to her questions. On the one hand, her construct was not correct, but on the other hand, she's well on her way to the water cycle. Water does go in a circle, not in the literal circle in our nature center, but that is a very nice scaffold on the way to understanding the water cycle. So when this new question was revealed from the transcript, we shared the transcript as a staff and discussed ideas for helping students understand how water systems and wetlands work. We could use a bowl and punch holes in one end while filling the other. We could dam up a small creek and watch what happens. We could make a landscape out of clay and flood it. We decided to give each child a plastic ball with their name on it to launch at a known part of the stream and then follow and see where the stream went. I still think about this documentation a lot. So by now it was dawning on me that we needed to communicate children's learning better to parents. I was creating these documents like the one that's shown here. I was making one for science, one for social studies, one for math, one for language arts every quarter of the year. I was making myself totally crazy. They were sent by email and I got almost no feedback from parents about them. They would send me a quick thank you or something, but it wasn't a dialogue. So it didn't invite dialogue, which was the problem. So we were documenting, we were trying to communicate this learning to parents, we were sharing the documentation with learners, but we hadn't put it all together into a neat package that was easy to use and easy to view and respond to. I had decided that the state standards were not our standards. Throwing away those state standards felt great for a minute, but it wasn't really respectful of our families who care about state standards, who are planning to transition to public school at some point and want a smoother transition, who need to answer questions from family members about the education their children are receiving. The fact is that the next generation standards are the ruler that we use to measure education in our country. For our program to become a chartered school, we will need data on how we provide an education equivalent to that which a child receives in public school and would receive based on those standards. So now my challenge was, how do we think that child-led learning, how do we link that child-led learning to the state standards? So I linked it. I started linking the projects to the New York State standards, which at the time was Common Core, but this was even more time intensive, and I was the only one doing it at this point. I couldn't bear to ask teachers to do this extra work after everything they were doing already. Here's a closer look at that piece. The story is, children naturally make collections. This is a math documentation. We can tap into their own desire to collect and count and guide them to build mathematical understanding. Joseph and Vera worked together to figure out how many flowers Vera had collected. On a walk, we gathered many mushrooms. We tallied up how many had gills and how many had pores, organizing our many baskets into one tally graph on the board. This was inspired by a spontaneous tally of how many of each kind of pets we had at home. So these were just things that were happening. We're eating lunch and kids started talking about how many cats they had and how many dogs. And I started tallying it up. So it's very easy to link that to understand the relationship between numbers and quantities up to 20, a New York State Next Gen mathematics learning standard for kindergarten. The next little bit, we had been collecting rocks from all over Lime Hollow for weeks. I was so lucky. I'm such a rock hound, and I had a bunch of rock hounds that year as kindergartners, so we collected rocks all the time. We needed a way to organize the collection, which was quickly taking over the shed that we used as an outdoor classroom. Children grouped the rocks by attributes: sparkle rocks, dulls, fossil rocks, softs, cement rocks, white and yellows, crystals with pink. And so this first photograph to the left at the bottom is their categorization of those categories, with me writing in those words for them. On another day, I asked the students to organize the rocks according to increasing amounts from 0 to 10. So I do so little of this kind of teacher-led work that they didn't clever on to the fact that this was very much a schoolish activity. But yeah. It was good to see them sharing their knowledge and checking with each other's counting for accuracy. So another game we play is called Rock On. They came up with the name. And it's really War. Remember the card game War? And so we have these numbered rocks, which they would draw out of a cloth bag, and the highest number wins. But that quickly became too easy. So then we would pull 2 rocks out and add them together to see who wins. And sometimes we would change the game to be the lowest number wins. And children like to know how many of something they have, and they often just count to see what that number is. So between all of those little stories, I was able to link all the standards on the left. So this is copying and pasting from the New York State Standards, which is a very awkward and clumsy document to use, and just piling them into a Word document that was getting sent to parents about 4 times a year. So then I started thinking about what were our standards. So the Reggio Emilia approach provided the answer again through documentation and relationships. Reggio Emilia principles have allowed me to solve this paradox. The paradox is that standard-based education, like lesson planning, is teacher-led education. We are child-led, which has no lesson planning. So how do we address these standards? I can tell you that children have no regard for the standards. Young children, they look at me like I'm from outer space when I implore them to stick to the standards. Older children use impolite language when I remind them that the people who designed the standards think they should be learning something else. For many years, I was really on the side of the children. I don't know the group of individuals who created Common Core or Next Generation. Do they know me or my community? I'm not in relationship with them. I'm in relationship with these 12 4 to 5-year-olds I work with every single day, and their parents, and my wider community. So we decided as an educational community to have monthly conversations that would be attended by parents, teachers, and learners. And during those conversations, we asked questions like, what is the role of the teacher in child-led education? What is our image of the child? What are the rights of the child? And from these conversations, we began to see that what we valued and expected from education and what our standards actually are. So this process has changed the way I think about community, teaching, cooperation, building a school together, education. I had so many assumptions. So all of those conversations that we had with parents, and they would happen in the evening, parents and teachers, there'd be children kind of milling in and out of the room. They were all transcribed and kind of distilled into a document. So here's a little excerpt from What Questions Do We Have About Children's Learning? Stephanie, what do they want to know? What should they know? And who decides? Ami, it seems to me that if you know your child, you can pretty much figure out what they know and what they can understand, what's appropriate. Sometimes they will ask you questions, but it's apparent that they have no context for the answers that you are giving. So that helps you form what level you can discuss at. Everything that is happening around the kid is what you should be talking about. You start at a certain level, and it's like a circular thing. Every time it comes up, you go a little deeper, a little further. Maryfaith, I think children do that. They talk about something for a while, and then they circle back around to it again. Ami, I think it's like that for everybody. Adults, you read a book at 20, and then you read it again when you're 40. Maryfaith, so if children learn that way, and all people learn that way, where we circle back around and come back to satisfy our curiosity, then over time, the questions build up again, and we come back to it. That's a nice way to teach then, right? Rather than teaching in a more linear way. Jess, I think in schools, the information is coming in and it's more than they are looking for at the time. Hannah, I think kids can get oversaturated that way. So, enter Storypart. Yes, descriptions. So this is how documentation becomes learning stories. The standards are tagged and the data is collected. This is an amazing thing. I was on a Facebook forum, and I was kind of putting the question out, what do people do about attaching learning standards to the actual learning stories that their children are experiencing? And a friend and colleague from Antioch, Megan Gessler, recommended this app called Storypart. She had found that the platform suited her program's needs for parent communication, and it was a framework that supported Reggio Emilia style documentation. We had tried other apps that were so clumsy to use and so time consuming that there was a kind of general rebellion about using apps in the preschool. So it was kind of a leap of faith to try this. But Megan walked me through it, and it functions like Facebook. It's so easy to use. We found that being an almost fully outdoor program that ranges all over hundreds of acres of nature reserve, a digital format works the best. Paper documentation is soon destroyed by mud and rain, and we don't have a central location to display it. Although we do have a building, there are months that we never go inside there. This format worked, I think, the best for our teachers. Everyone carries a phone as part of our safety protocols. So having our phones with us all the time meant that we could do this anytime we wanted. It's very simple to upload the photos. We type in a few sentences as the story is happening. Sometimes we type in the dialogue to remind ourselves of the exact words that children are using, or we can jot it down on a piece of paper, or I'd like to use my phone recorder on my phone and transcribe it in later. The little bits that we are able to do while we are caring for children become the notes that we fill in later. So from home, we will take that story that we started at school, fill in some background so that parents and the rest of the community will understand what was happening, fill in any documentation that was missing, upload anything that needed Wi-Fi to upload, which happens a lot. And we find that it's a beautiful format for us to use. The standards you can load into the app, which is amazing. This app is from New Zealand. And so none of our learning standards are in here. So I had to enter the New York State pre-K learning standards. And I think this next gen stuff is pretty much nationwide, developed by NACI perhaps. So it might be that if you did decide to go this route, you could, I made this, these learning standards set public, so you would be able to just use them. If your state standards are different, it took an afternoon to input them. That's what it would take. I would also encourage you to search the public sets to the left of the slide. You will find the most amazing Aboriginal learning standards, like from the Maori people. And reading these 8 ways of learning are just a beautiful set of learning standards. So I know that Megan Gessler is also working on Forest School learning standards, which are not included in the New York State pre-K learning standards. These are things that, as people who work with forest schools and outdoor learning, we know about all this other learning that is happening out there. And so it's a way of sort of codifying that and thinking about it more deeply and actually tagging it. I like the parity of like tagging it as an equal learning standard to the learning standards that are the kind of nationwide standards. I like that philosophy of doing that. Yeah, and it's interesting to think about and go through that process of developing that set of standards for yourselves. The other thing is, when we went through this process of designing our own standards by having these long conversations, those standards change every year. We have new parents that come and go from the school, and so it's not the same every year. So how will we deal with that when it comes to using a set of learning standards? I don't know. So I'm hoping to dig into that this summer a little bit more. That's an open question for me. Storypart is also awesome data analytics, which is super useful for providing important data for administrators, and also communicating to parents how thorough and comparable this education is for their children, and how it compares to traditional indoor education. Plus, they get all the benefits of outdoor education and nature connection. So here's what I found from our first 9 months of collecting data on the standards. If pie charts are not your thing, you can also present it as a word wall, which is a little easier for me to look at. Here are the top, everything is by size. So in the pie chart, the bigger the slice, obviously the bigger, the more number of times that learning standard was tagged in a learning story. In the word wall, how big the type is how often it was represented in a learning story. The part of the pie chart that was completely gray, that was standards that were used less than 2.5% of the time. And so they just didn't bother to draw in all those little lines. But this organization of data shows a little more clearly how that breaks down. So the biggest sections of the standards are kind of what we would expect it to be. The most frequently tagged state standards are social awareness, curiosity, creativity, imagination, and physical development. These are so important. They are the learning areas that we are most concerned with when we argue against curriculum pushdown and early academics in schools. Forest schools have been selling forest schooling on these learning areas forever, and we know that we are perfect for supporting this learning. There have also been good studies showing links between future academic learning outcomes and early emphasis on social emotional learning, play-based learning, and children being allowed to use their body's natural range of physicality in the early years. I would never ever want to de-emphasize these learning areas because this is exactly where we need to be. But scrolling down the word wall, we find what we are looking for: play-based, child-led academic standards. Here are the pre-K reading, science, math, and social studies tagged in play-based, child-led learning stories. So children in the wild do all these things, right? It's all here. But we are researchers, right? So what about the ones, this is from the pie chart, where it lists the percentage of times you used that learning standard tagged in a story. So here are the ones that got 0. What is going on with these? It's something we should probably look into as researchers. I'll blow up a few so you can take a look at them. Here's one, dance. Observes a movement and shares impressions. Demonstrates observed or performed movements originating from diverse dance genres. I don't know about your 3 to 5-year-olds, but mine have danced out the parts of Frozen so many times that I can't even count, arguing about whether Olaf really dances that way or not, being a snowman. I know that I've seen it a million times, and I know that we've tagged it 0% of the time. Here's another one, Earth and Space Sciences. Observes and describes the apparent motions of the sun, moon, and stars to recognize predictable patterns. So we have a sundial on our grounds where we eat snack at least once a week. We talk about where the shadow of the sun is and how the numbers work. We talk about the length of the shadow and predict where the sun will be at pickup time. We do this so much, it has become invisible to us. We have forgotten that it's curriculum. It's just part of our day and part of our culture. And every class does this activity every week, and not one of us tagged it, not even once. And here's another one that was interesting. Geometry describes objects in the environment using names of shapes and describes the relative positions of these objects using terms such as top, bottom, up, down, above, below, in front of, behind, over, under, next to. So there are so many things we are doing when we work with children in dialogic relationships. When we stop teaching and start listening to the questions that children are asking and ask good questions back to them, the possibilities open up for children's learning. Can you imagine a day in forest school where dialogic education is happening, where this standard isn't hit? We do this all day, every day. But I think the trouble is some of these things have become invisible to us because they're so part of our day. Anytime you're talking with children about what's going on in the world, you're using this standard. You're using all those words. You're talking about before and after, and above and below, and what's going on. I think that when it comes to what we need to work on, I think we need to increase our awareness of the curriculum that's happening all around us. It's a little hard because it's sort of like meta thought. You're thinking about your thinking as you're thinking it. But I think with practice, we can get better at this as an educational team in my school, where we're noticing more what standards we're hitting while we're hitting them. I don't think we need to change our teaching. I think we need to change how we're looking at our teaching. So I feel like we have a lot of work to do in this area, but this shift in awareness has worked wonders. Solving problems from the perspective of honoring our image of the child is what has made all the difference. We try to apply this thinking to all the problems that we have. What choices can we make that are respectful of our image of the child? We put that in the center now. Questions like, how do we build, feed, nurture, maintain a community culture of safety, joy, warmth, encouragement, high standards, support, caring, respect, and love? I love this quote. Reggio educators do not just ask themselves what kinds of cognitive learning goals they have for children, but they embed the project in a larger social, cultural, ethical, and political context. REA, Reggio Emilia approach ties together all the pieces of how a learning community can educate its young in the most culturally responsive and developmentally appropriate way. It offers me and my staff an opportunity to look unflinchingly at what is actually happening in our forest preschool, our forest kindergarten, and our forest school settings, and look at ways that we can keep that learning moving forward. So thank you for your kind attention as I share my journey in putting these pieces together. This process has been super powerful for me, and I also wish a fruitful journey to each and every one of you. I'm grateful for this community, and I welcome your questions. I've been talking a whole lot, and I welcome continued dialogue as a community of educators, and look forward to meeting you in other platforms and continuing this dialogue. We have a lot of work to do in the world, and the more support we can give to each other, the better. So I would like to open this dialogue up to more questions and more comments from all of you, so that I can learn from all of you and we can share what questions we have left over from what we've gone over. And I can leave the screen here, or we can return to the videos of each other.
Maryfaith, if you want to stop your screen share, yeah, and then people, anyone who, we can also stop the recording too. How about if I do that?
Sure.